The summer of 1914. Europe, bathed in sunshine, still doesn't know it stands on the brink of catastrophe. In London, Paris, and Berlin, a tense anticipation reigns. The shots in Sarajevo have already been fired, but their echo is only just beginning to spread across the continent. Diplomacy collapses, mobilizations follow one after another. On July 28th, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, and a week later, Germany invades neutral Belgium. The Schlieffen Plan is set in motion. Britain, bound by obligations to Belgium, enters the war on August 4th. From this moment, the clock of history begins to count down to a new era, an era of the greatest war humanity has ever seen. In the shadow of the grandiose events of the first weeks of the war, something occurs that will become a symbol for entire nations. The small Belgian town of Mons prepares to become the arena for the first serious test for British soldiers on the continent. While Europe plunged into the abyss of war, Great Britain began mobilizing its forces. The British Expeditionary Force, or BEF as it was abbreviated, was an elite formation. Although it was inferior in numbers to the Continental armies, numbering only about 100,000 men, the quality of training of British soldiers compensated for this drawback. Professional soldiers, hardened in colonial conflicts from South Africa to India, they represented a formidable force. Their rifle training stood out especially. Each British soldier could fire up to 15 aimed shots per minute from his Lee Enfield rifle. This rate of fire would soon be mistaken by the Germans for machine gun fire. The corps was commanded by Field Marshal Sir John French, an experienced cavalryman who distinguished himself during the Anglo-Boer War. The British Expeditionary Force consisted of 4 infantry and 1 cavalry division, organized into 2 army corps. The first was commanded by General Douglas Haig, the second by General Horace Smith Dorrien. The transfer of these forces to the continent was a true logistical feat. Beginning on August 9th, more than 1,000 vessels crossed the English Channel, delivering troops to French ports. The operation was carried out in strict secrecy, and German intelligence missed this critically important moment. By August 17th, the main British forces were already on French soil. From the ports of Le Havre, Boulogne, and Rouen, troops were transferred by rail to the Belgian border. Soldiers rode in crowded carriages, many even on the roofs. The French population greeted them as heroes, with flowers, wine, and kisses. Few of these young men in khaki understood what awaited them. On August 20th, the British arrived in the Maubeuge area in northern France. From there, they began a march to the Belgian city of Mons. The heat was unbearable. Soldiers marched along dusty roads, languishing under the weight of their equipment. Many collapsed from heat stroke. By August 22nd, British forces reached the vicinity of Mons and took up positions along the Mons-Condé Canal. Here, at the bend of the canal, they were to meet the advancing German troops. None of the British soldiers yet suspected that they would have to confront an enemy 3 times their number. The Schlieffen Plan, a strategic solution audacious in its brilliance, developed in the early 1900s by the chief of the German General Staff, Count Alfred von Schlieffen. The essence of the plan was a lightning-fast defeat of France through neutral Belgium, while Russia slowly mobilized its vast but unwieldy forces in the east. The right flank of the German armies was to pass through Belgium in a wide encircling movement, bypass French fortifications on the border, and, turning south, encircle the main enemy forces in a gigantic cauldron. It was a gambler's plan, staking everything on one card: speed. By August of 14, this plan had already undergone some changes introduced by Schlieffen's successor, Helmuth von Moltke the Younger. He somewhat weakened the right wing, strengthening the left to defend against a possible French invasion of Alsace. Nevertheless, the main idea remained unchanged: a swift strike through Belgium. The First German Army, under the command of General Alexander von Kluck, formed the spearhead of this strike. Von Kluck, a 67-year-old veteran of the Austro-Prussian and Franco-Prussian wars, was considered one of the most aggressive and decisive commanders in the German army. His troops, having passed through the Belgian cities of Liège and Brussels, advanced irresistibly towards the French border. The pace of the offensive was exhausting, up to 40 kilometers a day under the scorching August sun. Soldiers marched in dense gray-green columns, raising clouds of dust visible for many kilometers. The mood in the German units was upbeat. Soldiers and officers believed in their technical and tactical superiority. Memories of the triumphs of the Franco-Prussian War of '43 were still fresh. Many were confident they would return home victorious by Christmas. In letters home, they described their campaign as a triumphal march. The German war machine seemed invincible, disciplined, excellently trained, equipped with the best artillery in the world. On August 22nd, von Kluck's vanguard received intelligence of the presence of British troops in the Mons area. This was a surprise. The Germans had not expected to encounter the British so soon. Von Kluck did not attach much importance to this, considering the British Expeditionary Force a contemptible little army. He was confident that his numerical superiority, 3 corps against 2 British, would ensure a swift victory. The next day, German troops moved towards the Mons Condé Canal, where they were to meet an opponent they had underestimated. The Mons Condé Canal presented an ideal defensive line. A water barrier about 20 meters wide with high banks and numerous bridges that could be used as key defensive points. The canal's northern bend created a natural salient, which could serve as both an advantage and a potential trap for the defenders. The surrounding terrain was hilly, with many mining villages, slag heaps, and industrial structures, creating a complex landscape favorable for defense, but making observation and maneuver difficult. General John French, assessing the situation, decided to organize a defense along the canal. This decision was dictated by both tactical considerations and the need to support the left flank of General Lannesac's French Fifth Army, which was retreating under German pressure. British forces were deployed along a front approximately 30 kilometers long. General Haig's First Corps took up positions on the right flank, in the Maubeuge area. Smith-Dorrien's Second Corps was positioned on the left flank, directly along the Mons Condé Canal. The distribution of forces was uneven. On average, each battalion covered about a kilometer of the front, too much by the standards of the time. The canal salient near Mons, defended by the 5th Division, proved particularly vulnerable. Here, the British established bridgeheads on the north bank, pushing forward advanced outposts. Soldiers hastily fortified positions, turning houses and farms into strongpoints, barricading bridges, and setting up firing pits. Machine guns, of which there were only 2 per battalion, were placed in key directions. The chosen position had both advantages and serious disadvantages. The main advantage was the ability to use the canal as an anti-tank ditch and to deliver flanking fire on the advancing enemy. In addition, numerous mines and slag heaps provided excellent observation posts and cover for snipers. However, the disadvantages of the position were no less obvious. The canal salient near Mons created the danger of being outflanked. The industrial nature of the terrain, with many buildings, hampered observation and coordination. Furthermore, the British did not have enough time to engineer their positions. Most trenches were hastily dug, to a depth of no more than half a meter. But the most serious drawback was the strategic context. The British Expeditionary Force found itself in a dangerous situation due to the retreat of French troops on the right flank. There was a risk that the Germans would break through the French positions and get behind the British. General French, receiving contradictory information from the French command, did not have a complete picture of the situation and was forced to make decisions under conditions of uncertainty. The dawn of August 23, 1914, was foggy and cool. British soldiers, having taken up positions along the Mons-Condé Canal, anxiously peered into the milky haze that concealed the opposite bank. Many had spent the night fortifying their positions, barricading bridges with sandbags, turning stone houses into improvised forts, digging shallow rifle pits. Around 5 in the morning, the fog began to dissipate, and in the pre-dawn twilight, advanced posts noticed movement on the canal's northern bank. The Germans were approaching. The first shot rang out at 6:30 in the morning. A British sniper from the Royal Irish Regiment spotted a group of German officers conducting reconnaissance and opened fire. One of the officers fell. This became the signal for the battle to begin. Soon, German artillery opened massive fire on British positions. Shells exploded among the houses of Mons, raising fountains of earth and debris. British batteries returned fire, but their light field guns could not match the power of German howitzers. Around 9 in the morning, German infantry launched their first attack. They advanced in dense chains, as if on parade, shoulder to shoulder, with unfurled banners. The British met them with murderous rifle fire. Trained to deliver 15 aimed shots per minute, the soldiers created a true wall of lead. The German lines thinned before their eyes but continued to press forward. Those who survived reached the canal and attempted to cross it, but fell under the crossfire of machine guns. Corporal Arthur Thomas of the Middlesex Regiment later recalled, "They came at us in waves, like a parade. We fired and fired until the barrels of our rifles glowed red-hot. They fell by the tens, by the hundreds, but they kept coming. It was like a nightmare." By noon, the Germans, realizing the futility of frontal assaults, changed tactics. They began to use skirmish lines, moving from cover to cover. Artillery concentrated fire on specific sectors of the defense, aiming to create breaches for the infantry. Particularly fierce fighting unfolded at the bridge in Nîmes, where a company of Royal Fusiliers repelled 7 consecutive attacks. By 3 in the afternoon, the British position was becoming critical. The Germans had found weak points in the defense and began to outflank the salient at Mons. The commander of the Second Corps, General Smith-Dorrien, ordered a withdrawal of troops from the northern bank of the canal and a concentration of defenses directly along the water barrier. The retreat took place under continuous enemy fire. The Germans exerted the greatest pressure on the left flank of the British positions, where the 3rd Division was defending. Here, by 4 in the afternoon, they managed to cross the canal and establish a foothold on the southern bank. This created a threat of outflanking the entire British line from the west. General French, receiving reports of the critical situation and information about the retreat of the French Fifth Army on the right flank, made the decision for a general withdrawal. The Battle of Mons was a vivid example of how quality can stand against quantity. British soldiers, outnumbered by the Germans almost 3 to 1, compensated for this with superior fire training. Each infantryman could fire up to 15 aimed shots per minute from his Lee Enfield rifle, a rate unheard of in other armies. The density of fire was such that German commanders reported coming under massive machine gun fire, although in reality it was the work of regular riflemen. German Lieutenant Otto Winzer, who survived an attack on the Royal Fusiliers' positions, wrote in his diary, "The English met us with such fire that it seemed as if they had a machine gun for every soldier. Our ranks thinned with each step, but we continued to advance as we had been taught." It was this adherence to outdated tactics that became the fatal mistake of the German command. General von Kluck, underestimating the enemy, threw his battalions into frontal attacks in dense lines, directly into the murderous British fire. Such tactics might have worked against poorly trained opponents, but not against professional riflemen. In one day, the Germans lost about 5,000 men, a price they paid for neglecting the lessons of modern warfare. British artillery also demonstrated high effectiveness. The 18-pound field guns, despite their lower power compared to the German ones, were distinguished by high rate of fire and accuracy. Artillerymen skillfully used shrapnel shells against advancing infantry, mowing down entire platoons. However, the German superiority in heavy artillery was undeniable. Their 150mm howitzers could destroy fortifications inaccessible to British light guns. Captain Edward Spears, a French liaison officer at British headquarters, noted, "The German heavy shells made a terrifying impression. When such a shell hit a house, only a pile of rubble remained." But the Germans did not know how to use their artillery advantage to suppress specific targets. They fired at areas. Mons became the first test not only for British soldiers but also for the military doctrines of the early 20th century. It clearly demonstrated that massive infantry attacks against prepared positions lead to catastrophic losses. This battle foreshadowed the bloody stalemate of trench warfare that would soon engulf the Western Front. By the evening of August 23rd, General French faced an extremely difficult choice. The intelligence received indicated a critical situation. 3 German corps under von Kluck were advancing from the front, while to the right, the French Fifth Army of General Lanrezac had already begun to retreat under pressure from von Bülow's troops. The British Expeditionary Force risked being encircled. After a short but intense meeting with his corps commanders, French made the only possible decision: a strategic retreat. The order to withdraw reached the troops around 7 in the evening. Retreat, one of the most complex maneuvers in military art, had to be carried out under continuous enemy pressure. Smith Dorrien, commanding the Second Corps, personally oversaw the organization of rear guard actions. Elite units remained in position, covering the withdrawal of the main forces. The Royal Fusiliers, the Middlesex Regiment, and the Royal Irish Rifles bore the brunt of these battles. The retreat took place under extremely difficult conditions. Narrow roads quickly became clogged with carts of wounded, artillery, and supply trains. German airplanes, circling above the battlefield, adjusted their artillery fire. Communication with French troops was practically lost. Couriers struggled to make their way through territory already controlled by German patrols. Captain William Boyd of the Royal Irish Rifles recalled, "We withdrew in short dashes, stopping to fire a volley at our pursuers. Every bridge, every crossroads became a small battlefield. I saw how soldiers, who just that morning had been joking and laughing, now silently carried out orders, their faces darkened with fatigue and tension." The psychological impact of the retreat on the soldiers was immense. The British Army, which had not known serious defeats since the Crimean War, for the first time faced the necessity of abandoning hard-won positions. Many officers described a feeling of bitterness and disappointment. Ordinary soldiers, especially recruits, experienced confusion and anxiety. However, iron discipline and the professionalism of veterans helped maintain order in the retreating units. Sergeant Thomas Fraser of the Highland Light Infantry wrote in his diary, "The hardest thing is not the fatigue or the danger. The hardest thing is to see Belgian refugees, old men and women with children, trudging along the roads with bundles of belongings. In their eyes was a silent question, 'Why are you leaving us?' Many of us had tears in our eyes as we passed them, unable to explain anything." The retreat from Mons was the first, but not the last, test for the British Expeditionary Force. Ahead of them lay a long journey south, a journey that would go down in history as the Great Retreat. The Great Retreat, which began after the Battle of Mons, became a true trial for British soldiers. The army, having just endured its first serious fight on the continent, was now forced to cover vast distances at an exhausting pace. Every day, the British marched 30 to 40 kilometers under the scorching August sun. The soldiers marched, drenched in sweat, their feet chafed raw, carrying about 30 kilograms of equipment. Many collapsed from heat stroke right on the roadsides. Some fell asleep while walking, mechanically continuing to move their legs. Private George Cox of the Royal Fusiliers recalled, "We walked and walked and walked, day and night. Halts were short, barely enough time to gulp water from the flask. Boots turned into instruments of torture, every step echoed with pain. But we knew that stopping meant captivity or death." The Germans pursued the retreating British with unflagging persistence. Von Kluck's cavalry patrols constantly probed the flanks of the columns, artillery shelled the roads, and aviation adjusted fire and tracked the direction of movement. The British had to regularly stop and engage in battle to hold back their pursuers. These rearguard actions often turned into fierce skirmishes. One of the most dramatic episodes of the retreat occurred at Le Cateau on August 26th. Smith-Dorrien's Second Corps, having become separated from the main forces, was threatened with encirclement. Contrary to the order to continue the retreat, the general made a bold decision: to turn around and give battle. The British took up positions on low hills north of the town and met the advancing Germans with murderous fire. All day they held back the onslaught of 3 enemy corps, inflicting heavy losses. Under the cover of night, Smith-Dorrien managed to break away from the enemy and continue the retreat. This battle, although it cost the British about 8,000 men killed, wounded, and captured, saved the expeditionary force from annihilation. The morale of the troops was no less tested than their physical condition. Soldiers, raised on traditions of imperial glory, found it hard to endure the need to constantly retreat. Officers tried to maintain the spirit of their subordinates, sharing with them all the hardships of the march. General Smith-Dorrien personally visited bivouacs, talking with soldiers and encouraging them. Chaplains held short services right during halts. Regimental bands sometimes played lively marches as the columns passed through French villages. Despite all the difficulties, the British Expeditionary Force maintained its fighting capability. Discipline remained ironclad. Cases of desertion were isolated. The soldiers, though exhausted, kept their weapons in order and were ready to carry out any order. When the order came on September 5th to stop the retreat and launch a counteroffensive on the River Marne, the British turned around and advanced with the same tenacity with which they had retreated for 2 weeks. In British tradition, the Battle of Mons holds a special place. It is not merely the first clash with German forces in the Great War, it is a symbol that became the cornerstone of the nation's military identity. For the British, Mons embodies all the best qualities of their soldiers: resilience, professionalism, and composure in the face of superior enemy forces. The first memoirs of the battle's participants began to appear as early as 1915, when the war was in full swing. Officers and privates described their experiences with striking detail. These accounts, filtered through military censorship, shaped a certain image of the battle, a heroic confrontation of professionals against massive enemy attacks. Arthur Conan Doyle, author of the famous Sherlock Holmes stories, made a significant contribution to shaping the public perception of Mons. In his 6-volume, he wrote, "Official historiography picked up this narrative. In the interwar period, the historical section of the Imperial General Staff published the multi-volume Where Mons Was Accorded an Honored Place." The battle was depicted as a demonstration of quality over quantity, professionalism over mass. Literature and art solidified the image of Mons in national memory. Frederick Manning's novel, Her Privates, We, and Robert Graves's poem, Goodbye to All That, became classics of war literature, conveying the atmosphere of the early days of the war. Artists such as William Barnes Wallen created canvases depicting British riflemen coolly repelling attacks by German infantry. Remarkably, even defeat and the subsequent retreat were integrated into the heroic narrative. The Great Retreat from Mons to the Marne became a symbol of tenacity and endurance. Historian John Terraine noted, "In British military tradition, retreats often become as much a matter of pride as victories. Think of Dunkirk." The retreat from Mons is the first in this series. Mons also acquired ritual significance. After the war, numerous monuments were erected at the battle sites. Annually, veterans and their descendants make pilgrimages to the Mons-Condé Canal to honor the fallen. In 2000, Queen Elizabeth II unveiled a memorial commemorating the first and last British soldiers to die in World War I. Both fell at Mons. In the history of the First World War, there is a fascinating phenomenon that still sparks debate among historians and researchers of paranormal phenomena: the legend of the Angels of Mons. This military myth was born in the darkest days of August 1914, when exhausted British soldiers were retreating under the pressure of superior enemy forces. According to numerous testimonies, during the Battle of Mons and the subsequent retreat, supernatural beings appeared in the sky above the battlefield, protecting the British from the German advance. Some describe them as archers in ancient armor, reminiscent of the warriors of the Battle of Agincourt, others as figures in shining robes with fiery swords. The story of the guardian angels quickly spread through the trenches, rear hospitals, and eventually reached the British Isles. The first literary source that launched this myth was Arthur Machen's story, published in the London newspaper on September 29, 1914. Machen, a well-known author of mystical works, created a fictional narrative about how St. George and spectral archers from the past came to the aid of the retreating British. It is noteworthy that the author himself never claimed that his story was based on real events. It was a pure fabrication designed to boost the nation's morale. However, something amazing happened. Readers perceived the story as documentary evidence. The newspaper's editorial office was flooded with letters from people claiming that they or their relatives on the front had indeed seen angels. Church leaders picked up on this story, interpreting it as a sign of divine patronage for British arms. The clergy spoke of a miracle at Mons, comparing it to biblical appearances of angels. Military propaganda quickly realized the value of this spontaneously emerging myth. In the conditions of a protracted war, when the initial enthusiasm was replaced by an awareness of terrifying losses, British society needed symbols of hope and faith in ultimate victory. The legend of the Angels of Mons was ideally suited for this purpose. Government censors, who usually strictly monitored publications about the war, not only did not hinder the spread of this story, but covertly encouraged it. By 1915, the myth was acquiring new details. Eyewitnesses appeared, claiming to have seen German soldiers fleeing in panic from the heavenly host. Stories circulated that strange wounds, which could not have been inflicted by ordinary weapons, were found on the bodies of dead Germans. Some narrators claimed that the angels physically stopped the offensive, creating an insurmountable barrier between the adversaries. Psychologists and sociologists see in the phenomenon of the Angels of Mons a classic example of mass wartime myth-making. In extreme combat conditions, under the influence of fear, fatigue, and psychological stress, soldiers could interpret ordinary phenomena as supernatural. Clouds of dust and smoke, light effects from explosions, mirages in the hot air, all of this could be perceived by an exhausted mind as figures of angels. In addition, in situations of mortal danger, ancient protective mechanisms of the psyche, associated with belief in supernatural patronage, were activated. For German military historiography, the Battle of Mons was an unexpected revelation. An army accustomed to swift victories since the Franco-Prussian War encountered an enemy that did not conform to the notions of the Kaiser's generals. Field Marshal French's contemptible little army offered resistance that forced the German command to reconsider its views on the British armed forces. In the first official reports on the battle, German officers noted the unusually high density of fire their units encountered. Colonel Friedrich Berghaus of the 1st Westphalian Regiment wrote in his report, "The English created such a curtain of fire as I have not seen in my entire military career. We were convinced that each of their platoons was equipped with several machine guns, but prisoners subsequently reported that it was only rifle fire." The German command drew important lessons from this encounter. Firstly, it became clear that the Schlieffen Plan had encountered an unforeseen obstacle: a professional army capable of inflicting significant damage on advancing units. Secondly, the tactic of dense infantry formations, which was still used at the beginning of the campaign, proved completely ineffective against modern firearms. General von Kluck, commanding the German First Army, was forced to make adjustments to his plans after Mons. In his memoirs, published after the war, he acknowledged, "The Battle of Mons forced us to treat the British Expeditionary Force with much greater respect. Their firepower and professional training compensated for the numerical superiority of our troops." However, German propaganda presented events in a completely different light. For internal consumption, the Battle of Mons was portrayed as a victory for German arms, forcing the British to retreat. Newspapers were filled with headlines about the flight of the English, the triumph of the German spirit, and the inevitable collapse of the enemy coalition. Photographs of captured British soldiers and seized equipment reinforced this narrative. Kaiser Wilhelm II personally used reports from Mons to boost the nation's morale. In his address to the people, he declared, "Our valiant sons have already put the vaunted British army to flight. Soon they will enter Paris, and the war in the West will be won." Mons became a powerful stimulus for the mobilization of German society. The first casualty lists, which began to appear in newspapers, showed that the war would not be an easy stroll, as many politicians and military men had promised. It became clear that victory would require the exertion of all national forces. A massive campaign to raise funds for military needs began. Women enlisted as nurses. Teenagers joined youth auxiliary organizations. German historians of the interwar period, especially after the defeat in World War I, reinterpreted the significance of Mons. In the works of Hans Delbrück and Erich von Falkenhayn, the battle was seen as the first signal that the Lightning War plan might not work. They pointed to a strategic error, underestimating the enemy and overestimating their own capabilities. After World War II, in West German historiography, the Battle of Mons became a symbol of the miscalculations of militaristic thinking. Historian Gerd Krumeich wrote, "In Mons we see the first signs of that overconfidence which twice in the 20th century led Germany to catastrophe." For French military and politicians, the Battle of Mons became a crucial lesson in understanding the peculiarities of Allied interaction. When the British Expeditionary Force entered battle on August 23, 1914, the French Fifth Army under General Lanrezac was already retreating under pressure from von Bülow's troops. Coordination between the Allies was far from ideal. General Joffre, commander-in-chief of the French forces, initially underestimated the significance of the British contingent. considering it merely an auxiliary force. He was irritated that Field Marshal French acted with a certain degree of autonomy, guided not only by general strategic plans, but also by instructions from London. French military attaché Colonel Hughes, who was at the headquarters of the British Expeditionary Force, reported to Paris, "This assessment reflected a fundamental contradiction in the Allies' approaches. The French, for whom the war was fought on their native soil, were prepared to make significant sacrifices for strategic goals. The British, with their relatively small professional army, sought to minimize losses and avoid risks of encirclement. After Mons and the subsequent Great Retreat, the French command re-evaluated its attitude toward its British allies. General Joffre personally met with Field Marshal French on September 5th, persuading him to participate in the counter-offensive on the Marne. This episode became a turning point in the development of Allied relations. French historian Marc Ferro wrote, "In those September days, a true Franco-British brotherhood in arms was born. Both sides realized that they could only win together. However, coordination problems persisted throughout the war. Differences in military doctrines, the language barrier, rivalry between generals, all hindered effective interaction." French Captain Charles de Gaulle, future President of France, noted in his memoirs, "We spoke different languages not only literally, but also figuratively. Our understanding of war, its goals, and the methods of achieving them differed significantly. Mons and subsequent operations revealed the need for a unified command of Allied forces. However, this idea met with resistance from both sides. The British feared subordinating their troops to French command, while the French believed that they should determine the strategy, as they bore the main burden of the war. Only in the last year of the war, after catastrophic losses and under American pressure, did the Allies agree to establish a unified Supreme Command under Marshal Foch. The experience of the Battle of Mons had a long-term impact on the development of Franco-British military cooperation. The lessons of this first joint test were carefully studied and taken into account when planning future operations. In the interwar period, both general staffs paid particular attention to issues of coordination and compatibility of military doctrines. French General Maxime Weygand, analyzing the experience of World War I, emphasized, "An alliance of arms requires not only political will, but also thorough preparation, a common language of command, and mutual trust." These lessons proved especially valuable in the years of World War II, when Franco-British cooperation was once again put to the test. For Polish military analysts and historians, the Battle of Mons became a vital object of study in the context of forming their own military doctrine. The Polish state, resurrected after World War I, found itself in an extremely difficult geopolitical situation between Germany and Soviet Russia. In these circumstances, the lessons of coalition warfare acquired vital significance for Warsaw. The Polish General Staff thoroughly analyzed the experience of the first weeks of the war, when British and French troops tried to establish cooperation under the extreme conditions of the German offensive. General Tadeusz Kuczeba, one of the leading Polish military theorists of the 1920s, wrote in his study, "Mons showed that even between armies with long traditions of cooperation, serious coordination problems arise in combat conditions." For Poland, which can count on allies geographically distant from its territory, this lesson is of exceptional importance. Polish analysts identified several key problems that emerged at Mons. Firstly, the lack of a unified command, where the British Expeditionary Force operated with a certain autonomy from French troops. Secondly, differences in military doctrines and tactical approaches. Thirdly, an insufficiently effective intelligence exchange system. Finally, the psychological aspect, different perceptions of war priorities and goals. Marshal Józef Pilsudski, the de facto creator of the Polish armed forces, carefully studied the lessons of Mons. He understood that in the event of a conflict with Germany or Soviet Russia, Poland would not be able to count on immediate assistance from Western allies. Based on this, the doctrine of two enemies was formulated: the ability to conduct defensive operations on two fronts until assistance arrived from outside. Polish military theorist Władysław Sikorski, future Prime Minister of the Polish government in exile during World War II, developed the concept of self-sufficient defense. In his book, The Future War, he wrote, "We must be prepared to fight alone for weeks and months, relying only on our own forces." The experience of the British at Mons and during the Great Retreat shows that even a superbly trained professional army can find itself in a critical situation without reliable coordination with allies. Polish military personnel paid special attention to studying the psychological aspects of coalition warfare. They noted that the British command at Mons was forced to balance between the strategic interests of the coalition and national priorities, preserving the combat effectiveness of its small professional army. This lesson was especially important for Poland, whose army was significantly inferior in technical equipment to potential adversaries. General Kazimierz Soskowski emphasized, "We must clearly realize that in coalition warfare, each ally pursues not only common, but also its own interests." This is not cynicism, but the reality of international relations. Polish military thought drew practical conclusions from the analysis of the Battle of Mons. In the interwar period, great attention was paid to training liaison officers with knowledge of foreign languages, creating compatible communication systems, and developing unified terminology and conventional signs for interaction with potential allies. Staff games simulating coalition war scenarios were regularly conducted. The tragic irony of history is that the lessons of Mons could not prevent the catastrophe of September 39. When Nazi Germany attacked Poland, the Western Allies, bound by contractual obligations, did not take decisive action. The Polish army fought alone, while on the Western Front, a phony war reigned, a period of inaction by Anglo-French troops. History seemed to repeat itself in reverse. Now Polish soldiers were fighting rearguard actions, retreating under the onslaught of superior enemy forces, while their allies remained passive observers. The Battle of Mons became a watershed in the history of early 20th century military art. This clash vividly demonstrated the conflict between outdated doctrines and the harsh reality of modern warfare. The German command, raised on the traditions of the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, continued to believe in the decisive power of massed infantry attacks. The British, drawing on the experience of colonial conflicts, relied on firepower and maneuver. These opposing approaches collided on the banks of the Mons-Condé Canal with a predictable result: a bloody slaughter for the attacking side. Mons was the first bell, announcing the end of the era of Napoleonic tactics. Dense infantry formations, still effective against primitively armed opponents in the colonies, proved suicidal against modern weapons. A British soldier with a Lee Enfield rifle, capable of making 15 aimed shots per minute, created a density of fire comparable to a machine gun. No massed attacks could withstand such fire. The Battle of Mons also became a test for the concept of expeditionary forces. The British model of a small but highly professional army clashed with the continental model of mass conscript armies. And although in the short term quality yielded to quantity, forcing the British to retreat, the very fact that they were able to inflict serious damage on the enemy and maintain combat effectiveness spoke of the viability of the British military system. Particular attention should be paid to the role of artillery in the battle. German heavy howitzers demonstrated their superiority over British field guns in destructive power. However, the British compensated for this superiority with skillful use of terrain and camouflage. This lesson led to a revision of artillery doctrines on both sides. Mons became a harbinger of the transition to trench warfare. Although the battle was maneuverable, it already demonstrated a key feature of the future Western Front: the advantage of the defending side. British soldiers, even in shallow, hastily dug trenches, could effectively resist a numerically superior enemy. This lesson would be repeatedly confirmed in the subsequent 4 years of the war. An important aspect of the battle was the use of new technologies. German aviation, although primitive by modern standards, played an important role in reconnaissance and artillery fire correction. The British demonstrated the effectiveness of field telephone communications for coordinating unit actions. Both sides used motor transport for supply and troop movement. Mons became a testing ground for these innovations in real combat conditions. The Battle of Mons also influenced the development of military medical services. A large number of wounded, especially on the German side, revealed shortcomings in the evacuation and aid system. British field medicine, based on the experience of colonial wars, proved more effective. This experience was taken into account by both sides when reorganizing medical services. Mons also became a test for the troop command system. The British model, which gave more initiative to junior officers, showed its advantages in a rapidly changing environment. The German system, more centralized and hierarchical, made it difficult to adapt to unexpected situations. This lesson led to a certain revision of command principles in both armies. Finally, the Battle of Mons became an important psychological experience for both sides. British soldiers, encountering a European enemy for the first time after decades of colonial wars, realized the scale and intensity of modern conflict. German troops, confident in their superiority, received a sobering lesson. This psychological shock affected the morale of both armies in the subsequent months of the war. More than 100 years have passed since the first major battle of British troops in the Great War, on the banks of the Mons-Condé Canal, echoed with gunfire. Yet the lessons of this engagement continue to be relevant for modern military thought. Mons became not merely an episode of a long-past war, but a symbol to which strategists and military theorists of the 21st century turn. What, then, is the enduring significance of this battle? First and foremost, Mons demonstrated a fundamental principle that remains relevant in modern conflicts: the advantage of the trained professional over numerical superiority. British soldiers, despite being outnumbered 3-1, managed to inflict serious casualties on the enemy and retreat in an organized manner, preserving their combat effectiveness. In an era of high-tech warfare, this lesson takes on new meaning. Small professional units with modern weaponry are capable of standing against significantly superior forces. A second crucial lesson from Mons concerns international military cooperation. The coordination problems between British and French forces in August 1914 clearly showed how complex interaction can be, even between allies. Modern multinational NATO operations and UN peacekeeping missions face the same challenges: differences in doctrines, language barriers, incompatibility of communication and command systems. The experience of Mons underscores the necessity of early preparation for coalition actions. The third lesson is related to the psychological dimension of war. The legend of the Angels of Mons shows how, in extreme conditions, myths are born that bolster national morale. In the modern era of information warfare and psychological operations, this aspect gains particular importance. Control over the narrative, the ability to shape the perception of events, becomes no less important than tactical victories on the battlefield. Finally, Mons demonstrates the value of strategic flexibility. Field Marshal French's decision to retreat, though painful for British prestige, preserved the army for future battles. In modern conflicts, where political considerations often dominate military ones, the ability to make unpopular but necessary decisions remains critically important for commanders. Mons also influenced the development of military technology. The experience of the first engagements of the Great War led to a revolution in weaponry, from aviation to armored vehicles, from communication tools to artillery systems. Modern armies continue this process of technological adaptation, learning lessons from every conflict. For military academies around the world, the Battle of Mons remains a classic example for study. Cadets at Sandhurst, St. Cyr, and West Point analyze commanders' decisions, tactical maneuvers, and the strategic consequences of this engagement. Mons teaches them that war is not only a clash of armies but also a test of national character, a verification of command and logistics systems, a confrontation of doctrines and technologies.